June 4th, 1989 was one of the darkest days in the history of China, and the deepest pain in all of our hearts. 30 years passed, 33 years passed, the pain of history could not be covered up by lies written in ink and cold-blooded power. Those young students, those warm-blooded nationals, their passion for democracy and freedom should not be forgotten by history. And more importantly, the June 4th massacre showed the true face of CCP. Commemorating June 4th reminds the whole world that the Chinese Communist Party is a brutal communist regime whose existence is the greatest challenge to the free world and the universal values. And here are the reasons why we decided to organize this exhibition. We are very grateful to VOC for raising this opportunity for us to provide such a wonderful space to arrange the exhibition. To help us commemorate 1989 democracy movement, Ambassador Grandberg, Christina, Brittany, Ashley, Colin, and the rest of staff, thank you. I would also like to thank David Yunahai, who lead this exhibition and devoted a great deal of time and energy to its security. Without him, the exhibition would not have been possible. David, please stand up. Because I once again, we give him a big round of applause. Finally, I would like to thank 周峰所、金岩、吕金花、陈立群、郑旭光 and other friends who provide a lot of support for this exhibition. In particular, I would like to thank the young volunteers who are still out there working. It's very encouraging to have the young generation on board. Now I would like to invite Ambassador Grandberg to share his speech. Ambassador Grandberg is the president and the CEO of the Victim of Communist Memorial Foundation. Please, Ambassador.
Welcome to the Victims of Communism Museum. I haven't had a chance to stay there all night. They've only been open for a whole another week. So thank you and welcome again. We're so honored to have you all here with us. We're so deeply grateful to have this exhibit that we can open now to the world and all that comes. As you heard, the Tiananmen 1989 is the most extensive exhibit ever mounted or presented in the United States about the Chinese people's heroic struggle for democracy in 1989. We would especially like to thank the June 4 Massacre Memorial Association for their tremendous work in putting together this very powerful exhibit. As I said, we are so proud as the Victims of Communism Museum that this will be the first temporary exhibit as our museum opens just in a week and a half. The free world, 1989 is frequently remembered as the year of miracles, where the Berlin Wall fell and it led to the Soviet Union crumbling. But in China, it showed the brutal lengths that the Chinese Communist Party was willing to go, slaughtering its own citizens to preserve its own power. Sadly, we are still living in the aftermath of the fateful night in June 1989. And it's for this reason that we still commemorate this appalling tragedy today. We stand in solidarity with the millions across China who were impacted by that event and continue to suffer in silence at the hands of an all-encompassing power of the state. We also stand in solidarity in a particular way with the people of Hong Kong, who until recently were the only people in all of China who could commemorate this day's events, free from state repression. Since 1989, Hong Kongers have to mourn those who lost their lives during an annual vigil at Victoria Park. But this will be the second year that no such vigil will take place now, because the CCP has snuffed out any dissent in their one-party rule as they've crushed democracy in Hong Kong. As we hold this reception, the launch of this powerful exhibit, we remember that any mention of the massacre will be erased in the country where it happened. The Tiananmen Museum in Hong Kong has been shuttered, the Goddess of Democracy statues torn down, and that is why it is so important for us to honor those who stood for freedom and to educate future generations about what took place. Thank you again for joining us today to honor the memory and remember victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre and the brave heroes who have resisted tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party for years. And we look forward to seeing many of you this evening at the Victims of Communism Memorial by the Capitol as we commemorate our own candlelight vigil tonight at 8 p.m. Thank you so much.
We would like to come, but just a message that unfortunately we are able to attend the speaker schedule in this district, but we have Colonel Posey, Republican Staff Director of Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. He will be delivering remark on his behalf.
各位观众们，大家好。Speak on behalf of Congressman Smith, as we just heard. So you have to hear my voice, but think of Mr. Smith, please. So thank you. Today we remember on this as the 33rd anniversary approaches the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, where over 1 million peaceful protesters had gathered at the center of Beijing to challenge the Chinese Communist Party's suppression of freedom, human rights, and democracy. Instead of being welcomed as a true voice of the people, these brave heroes of China were slain by soldiers who fired into the peaceful crowd, crushed by tanks that ran over idealistic students and youth. These student-led protests that began earlier in April of the same year symbolized a landmark rejection of communism in the post-Mao era, while smaller demonstrations rippled in over 400 different cities. With the eyes of the world upon the students in the square, beginning on June 3rd and then June 4th, the communist regime bared its claws as unarmed demonstrators and supportive bystanders, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, were brutally beaten, arrested, or killed after then President Yang Shangkun, along with Premier Li Peng, declared martial law and mobilized 300,000 troops. The aftermath of the CCP's violent suppression was sickening, and the memory of the noble and courageous demonstrators lives on in our memory today, and some of whom are with us here today. I'm staring at a couple of these heroes right now. On this day, we remember more than 10,000 innocent people who were killed and the thousands more who were wounded. We remember those forced into exile and those who remain disappeared. We send our most sincere condolences to the families that still suffer today from their loved ones' sacrifices. We remember and honor all the ordinary citizens who peacefully stood against the most violent, godless ideology in history, communism. As the Chinese government refuses to commemorate this event, as we just heard, even in Hong Kong, that commemoration is suppressed, and has seemingly erased this date from history books, Mr. Smith and others in Congress, and I myself, my staff that's here at the Lantos Commission, will never forget the June 4th massacre. Nor will you. It is you who will write the true feel that same outrage and violation today and every day, for that same regime is in power, and the repression of the Chinese people by its rulers has gotten even worse. Now, since Mr. Smith has been in Congress, Xi Jinping has tightened his grip on human rights, civil liberties, and universally recognized freedoms. Today, the Chinese Communist Party continues to commit genocide and crimes against humanity, as millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other ethnic minorities are held in concentration camps against their will, forced to labor, and condemned into sexual slavery. We know that Uyghurs and other minorities and religious dissidents, like Falun Gong practitioners, and let's not forget the Han Chinese who suffer from this regime, are having their organs harvested. At the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission hearing that we held last month, with tremendous help from the Victims of Communism Foundation, our witnesses confirmed cases of forced organ harvesting dating back to the 1990s. Our witnesses also documented from Chinese sources how the CCP has grossly falsified organ donor registry data. Now, as ranking member of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, as well as co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, Mr. Smith has led numerous hearings, I think it was over 74 human rights in China, on first sterilization, population control, coerced abortions. He's drafted critical legislation to champion liberty in China and to hold this rogue regime accountable. His most recent bipartisan legislation, H.R. 7193, the China Trade Relations Act 2022, that he introduced in March of this year with Tom Suozzi of New York and Tom Tiffany of Wisconsin, looks to strip China of its permanent normal trade relations status until it makes true progress on human rights. And his forced organ harvesting bill 1592, Mr. Smith introduced along with Tom Cotton in the Senate, aims to prohibit the transfer of organ transplant surgery devices to those who take part in this horrific practice and sanction those who are culpable, while imposing mandatory reporting on human organ trafficking in China and elsewhere. Now, more than ever, such legislation is needed. We cannot acquiesce in the face of evil. We cannot be neutral when it comes to the grossest violations of human rights and barbaric cruelty inflicted upon the Chinese people by its own rulers. China remains a totalitarian dictatorship, a society stripped of the rights granted by heaven. That will change. Today, we commemorate the victims of Tiananmen Square massacre, living and dead. It is they who speak from the grave and from exile to the next generation. It is they, it is you, who represent the true China, the China that we all hope one day will be restored. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Now we are going to go to a video from Senator the Lord thanks for support from the Senator.
And the fight of the Chinese people for their freedoms. Now, the victims of communism generation, they're pulling together an exhibit. You want to see this one because there are artifacts from this fight, a vigorous fight for freedom.
Thanks for Senator Michael. Now I would like to invite Dr. Zhang Yu to the stage. That is the project director for this exhibition. He's also the publisher of Beijing Spring magazine, dedicated to promoting human rights, democracy, and social justice in China for many years. Please.
Ambassador Berger, distinguished guests. As the project director of the Tiananmen 1989 special exhibit, I would like to echo Wang Dan's remarks and extend a warm welcome to all of you. I also would like to express our group's deep gratitude to the POC for placing so much trust and confidence in us. As many of you already know, we plan to eventually build a permanent museum in New York. the opportunity provided by DOC is really a firework of the New York Museum. Under long-term leadership, we worked tirelessly to produce the best exhibit we can manage. And I hope when you see it, you will not be disappointed. On a personal level, I've had the privilege and the pleasure to work closely with the good people of DOC. They include Christina Owning, Colin Prince, Ashley Davis, and especially Brittany Palmer, who I believe is busy performing some tasks somewhere in this building. I came to VOC 6 times from New Jersey to work on the exhibit, and Brittany was here every time to greet me and help me. Ambassador Greenberg, too, stopped by several times to check on our progress and give us encouragement. So thank you, Ambassador Greenberg. I also want to use this occasion to express my appreciation for some of the people on our own team. Zhou Fengsuo, in particular, who, like Wang Dan, was on Chinese regime's most wanted list. It's really a miracle worker in terms of locating physical items from 1989. You can see the fruit of Fengsuo's labor in the next room in the form of a tent, a bloody shirt, and several other items, big and small. Jin Yan, Li Hongqing, Yang Zili, James Kong, Emily Yuan, and Qu Yige also helped with mounting exhibit, and many others also contributed in other ways. Finally, I want to congratulate DOC for the imminent opening of the DOC Museum. Of all the museums in Washington, this VOC museum holds a distinction. The distinction is that its subject is more alive than dead. Communism, the practice of communism, arose from a dark, diseased corner of the world. It continues to bring about suffering, subjugation, especially in my beloved homeland, China. Its evil tentacles have reached far and wide, and it has become a mortal threat to the values we all cherish: democracy, fundamental rights, and justice for all. I'm glad the free world is finally losing its complacency and confronting the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm confident that the new VOC Museum will play a vital role in this epic struggle. Thank you very much.
Now I would like our old friend to share his previous aspects served as the principal China policy on the policy planning staff to Secretary in the State Department. So the big supporter for Chinese democratic movement.
Thank you very much, Wang Dan, and thank you, Andrew, for this incredible partnership. History needs to be reminded all the time, particularly in Washington, D.C., where things happen today and can be forgotten tomorrow. So let me just share a brief, some moment of sort of my extemporaneous thoughts here with you on this very solemn and critical day of commemorating those who make great contribution to the eventual freedom and democracy in China. Now, first thing I would like to say is I am always puzzled by two iconic statements about the nature and the scope of the Tiananmen movement. First one is called student-led Tiananmen. It was led by the students, but they inspired the nationwide uprising against tyranny. So Tiananmen was obviously the center, but you go back to refresh your memory, you will see in every major metropolis in China or in a major countryside region, there were Tiananmen-like movements. So let's not forget about that. Secondly, we like to focus on this iconic moment in history that shows great bravery of ordinary citizens. The most iconic image, obviously, was the tank man. Tank man was an individual. It was the symbol of the spirit of Chinese people. And here's what I'm going to say. I think we need to have a rectification of names. That is, it is not an act of one particular individual, one particular group of people. It might be vanguards of the popular movement, but it is a nationwide resentment, revolt against communist leadership. You cannot say, you can say the same thing about 1956 Hungarian uprising. You can say the same thing about 1968 Prague Spring in the Soviet bloc. So this is the very important point because when I was in the government, whenever we bring up the issue that Chinese government and Chinese people are not the same, they always cite some kind of ridiculous surveys and 95% of Chinese people were endorsing Chinese Communist Party. I said, well, how about you explain the 1989 Tiananmen movement? They couldn't, they cannot, because it's Chinese government versus Chinese people. There has never been a moment in modern Chinese history when the fundamental confrontation between the interests of the party and the interests of the people so revealed, so clear. So that's one thought. Second thought I was going to say is, I would like to share with you is the illusion that somehow a reformed communist regime can lead China to bright future. It's never happened. It could never happen because Tiananmen is a very good example to prove to the world that even the most reform-minded leader of Chinese Communist Party, the architect of reform and opening up, would never spare a moment of time in ordering massacre of some people. So it's always a mystery to me why in the world do we still have to pin our hope for a bright future of China on a counter-gender communist. So that illusion should be gone a long time ago because it is the institution, it is the system that created people like Deng Xiaoping, like Hu Yaobang, like other people. So there is institutional limitation to those sort of things. So that's my second point that I have to share with you. Third issue is this. In the US government, there's always this hope that somehow, if Xi Jinping is gone, US-China will be much improved. After all, the worst part of the US-China relationship took place in the last 10 years or so when Xi Jinping was in charge. This was also erroneous. If we don't understand the true meaning of Tiananmen movement, we will have erroneous understanding of our soul. It's a wishful thinking because we don't want to return to the pre-Xi Jinping era because pre-Xi Jinping era that will also happen. Deng Xiaoping was right when he said the Tiananmen movement was instigated by the international mega climate 国际大气候. He was right, but it was not a conspiracy. It was a mega planning of pro-democracy movement, the same pro-democracy movement that brought down communist systems in the Soviet bloc. So unfortunately, Tiananmen movement inspired global uprising against communist system, but it did not succeed in its origin, place of origin in China. So I'm so inspired by what you guys, and so the road to freedom and democracy in China is long, but we should all be hopeful because the fact that we're still here 33 years, and to do every bit of whatever we can, and it should give us hope. And thank you very much for including me in the video.
Next, I would like to invite Wei Jingsheng to the stage. We all know Wei Jingsheng is Chinese human rights and democracy fighter. He's the president of the Wei Jingsheng Foundation. Moreover, he famously authored the essay "The Fifth Modernization." He was sentenced to jail twice for a total of more than 18 years due to his democracy activities.
Sorry, I didn't answer quite quick. All you guys speak good English, but not me, so I have to do this translate.
最近咱们今年60，但是呢，网上有很多人在那说，64没有什么精神，64就是耻辱，中国人的耻辱。
So we are in commemoration of the June 4th massacre, and then we are talking about spirit of June 4th, a spirit of 1989, and there are some debate on the internet to say, look about June 4th, it's just a shame on us.
64确实是个耻辱，那是共产党屠杀人民的一个巨大的耻辱。
And yes, indeed, the June 4th is a shame on us. It's a shame that the Chinese communist regime massacred its own people.
有人说，那你们纪念什么呢？我要说，我们纪念的是那些英勇牺牲的烈士精神。
So then we say, people will ask, what are you commemorating for? Then I will say, we are making commemoration of those martyrs whose spirit will stay with us.
敢于拿自己的生命，不是为自己的利益，而是为人民的全国的利益去拼死斗争。这是一种精神，一种很高尚的精神。
They use their lives to make a sacrifice for the benefit of the people, all the Chinese in the whole country, not for their own benefit. This is a very high moral.
89年以后，共产党和他的宣传机器，包括一些知识分子配合，就在拼命的宣传，说这个宣传一种精致的利己主义，民主那东西能当饭吃吗？
And after 1989, the Chinese communist regime has been propagating, along with their assistants, to say something. Say, what about democracy? You could use democracy for dinner, and that was kind of promoting you only serve for yourself.
但是人除了吃饭，还有很多的东西，自由、获得尊严、自己的权利，这些都是人必须的东西。
But the people who's living not just to eat, they also have their freedom, their dignity, all those moral values.
没有了自由，没有了基本的权利，只知道吃饭，那人和猪狗有什么区别呢？
Or without a sense of freedom, you only cared about to eat. Then what's the difference between human and dogs and pigs?
从江泽民时代开始，他们就开始宣传这一套。那么64以后，他们宣传的更厉害了，有很多无耻的知识分子也配合他们宣传，这个对中国人的影响非常大。
It has been so since the Jiang Zemin time. After the 1989 June 4th massacre, there is also some Chinese intellectuals cooperating with that. That's really a damage to the Chinese people.
我在网上看到有记者打电话到那儿去采访，说啊，现在的中国人都已经不关心民主了，年轻人只知道吃喝玩乐。我想你一个记者从外国打电话来，谁也不知道你是什么人，人家怎么敢跟你说真话呢？
And there are some reporters from foreign media would call people inside China and ask them, and then they'll say, "Oh, now Chinese do not forget about democracy and freedom, and they do not want it." But my question is, when you call from overseas, how dare the Chinese people to speak out of their mind?
20多年来，我在大街上经常被人认出来，然后戴着墨镜，人家说你戴着墨镜，我给你认识。 然后他们对我表达的都是很支持中国的民主，希望中国人也能有罪。没有人说我不关心中国的民主。
For more than 20 years now, I would be recognized by people on the street, even if I wear sunglasses, and they'll recognize me, and they'll come to me and to say they support the democracy in China. Nobody says that they do not support the democracy in China.
我不能打电话回国，我怕连累大家，连累别人。但是从我的推特上看，一多半都是年轻人或者中年人在支持民主，在要求自由，甚至这个强烈的程度一点不比我们差。
I cannot make a phone call to China because I do not want to cause some trouble inside China. But if you read my tweets, you will see there were so many Chinese who support democracy and freedom. Many of them are young and middle-aged people. They are just to support democracy as we were back before, and maybe they are even stronger.
里边有一半的人，一半的推特上的这个人，往往叫魏爷爷或者魏叔叔，说明他们都是很年轻的人，但是他们很尊敬这边为了民主争取，为中国的民主做出牺牲的人。
And those people would call me grandpa way or uncle way, so that indicates their age. But you can see how much they respect the people fighting for democracy and freedom in China.
我们现在做的事情，正是要为中国的人民注入这种敢拼死为了自由斗争的精神。
So now what we are doing is to inject the Chinese people with this spirit that they will die for freedom. This kind of spirit.
中国需要这种精神。
China needed this kind of spirit.
谢谢。
Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Mark Kifo to share his speech with us. Mark is the president of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. I'm also the on board, and previously he was the executive director of the Hong Kong-based Asia Business Council, editor-in-chief of South China Morning Post.
Well, thank you very much, Wang Dan and Mr. Bromberg, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I mean, so many heroes from Tiananmen. I feel quite humbled to be here. 3 years ago, I was in Victoria Park in Hong Kong with 160,000 other people commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen killings. And I couldn't have imagined that 3 years later, so many of my friends and colleagues in Hong Kong would be in jail. And that's why we started the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. I was on the board of Next Digital, which published Apple Daily, which I think many of you know is a pro-democracy newspaper. And I now have 7 of my colleagues in jail. Jimmy Lai, editor-in-chief. Jimmy was the founder, of course. And I think that, you know, it feels very dark right now with Xi Jinping. But on the other hand, I think as some of the other speakers have said, the contradictions are mounting. And I think the scales are falling from the world's eyes. And I think people see the true face of the communist China regime, the face that I think many of you have known for many, many decades. And I think that technology and the fact that so many of us have been forced out of Hong Kong into the diaspora gives us new possibilities. And so I wanted, with the help of my colleague in the back, Colleen, and show a brief video about some of our we're trying to draw attention internationally to June 4th, because I think June 4th now is becoming not just a commemoration of what so many of you suffered in Beijing 33 years ago, but it's becoming a day when all of us can remember and commemorate all the victims of Chinese communism, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, Southern Mongolians, the Han Chinese, of course, and the people of Hong Kong. So let me just, I'll show it's just a 1-minute video. This was Tuesday night in London. This is the London Tower Bridge. So I have nothing else to say except I'm so honored to be here. The fight goes on, we're into a new chapter, and let's see where we are next year. You know, this won't last. I'm old enough to remember the Berlin Wall going up. I lived in Berlin in 1980, 81, and of course I saw the wall come down. And I think the fight goes on with people like you. I'm confident that freedom, liberty, justice will prevail, because as Mr. Wei said, I mean, people aren't animals. You know, we live by more than bread and rice alone. We live for freedom, justice, and truth. And I'm just honored to be part of this and be here at the opening of the museum on this important day. So thanks.
Powerful support. Last but not least, I would like to invite my good friend, Wei Kai-Xi, to the stage. You all know in 1989 he was also one of the student leaders and now is serving as the General Secretary in the Taiwan Parliamentary Human Rights Commission.
Friends. It's good to feel, it's a good feeling to feel being among friends. Now we're among friends. This is congratulations to the exhibition. Every year when we come to June 4th, when we commemorate this days in the last 33 years, we use a Chinese idiom called 时光飞逝, time flies. Time flies when you say, okay, it's already been 33 years, but what happened 33 years ago, very much in our vividly in our memory, therefore, yes, time do flies. But it doesn't. It doesn't fly for those who are still counting for the days that they can pay their respect to the fallen loved ones. For Tiananmen mothers, time didn't fly. They have been counting every day, every hour, every minute in the last 33 years. Time didn't fly for them. Time didn't fly for many of the democracy activists who have been thrown into prison. Time didn't fly for Jia Jielian, for those who stayed in their age in 1989. Time did not fly for them. Time didn't fly for, well, if time flies, how can we still having this Chinese Communist regime who committed this atrocity and still being in power? Time didn't fly for me. I have been living in exile for 33 years and hoping one day that I can go back to Tiananmen and then pay respect to those who perished way too young for their dreams.
And then I was hoping that one day I can go home and embrace my ailing parents and tell them I'm sorry for putting you through this. But 33 years I have been waiting for that moment and didn't come. It's a very, very painful, long time that didn't fly. 80s, the decade of the 1980s is a hopeful time that gave us, the Chinese students, hope to took the street and say, okay, you promised us open and reform. We want you to fulfill that promise. We demand that. That's the true nature of 1989 student movement. That movement, we were naive. We students were naive. We took the street actually hopeful. You see the image of this, and of course today is a commemoration day of a massacre. But before that day, the spirit in Tiananmen Square on the face of my fellow Tiananmen student the whole generation was hope. It was hope. We had hope. Hope is a mighty powerful force. Can drive you to take the street, to go through hunger strike. And then it spread the spirit in 1989 to more than 400 cities in China. And then it spread across border to Berlin, to Romania, to Eastern European countries. And then that consequently ended the Cold War. Like motion of my friend Miles just reminded us. We were the vanguard of a great campaign that should be written down in the history of the 20th century, but it failed in the original place of that campaign. We were the pioneer. We were the sacrificing pioneer. Much have changed in the last 33 years. Well, we see the ending of the Cold War, but also much haven't changed. We're still having the Chinese Communist regime ruling this country. And then from that day on, from the June 4th, one thing changed is that we no longer have hope for Chinese Communist Party. But then much hasn't changed. We see after Tiananmen, the world seems to still hold on the hope to Chinese Communist Party. We feel betrayed in 1989 in the day of June 4th. You promised us political reform. We were demanding that, and then this is your answer. That's how we feel. That's how much we feel betrayed. But then, in the last 33 years, the feeling of betrayal is still there because the support we had during those 50 days in Tiananmen from all over the world didn't translate into a force to help end who conducted this massacre stay involved. The world stay in the same business. Went parade to Beijing to sign a trade deal. And there's three assumptions. The first assumption is, well, okay, if we keep doing business with China, we're going to make China give birth to a capitalism enrich China will give birth eventually to a huge middle class, and then give birth to civil society, and then give birth to democracy. That's the first assumption. At best, I call it naive. And then the second assumption is, well, okay, yes, we know we are enabling a Chinese totalitarian regime. There will be consequences for that, but the consequences perhaps is just will be within the Chinese border. And yeah, we know what's happening in Tibet. But in the longer run, the world may benefit from this trade-off. This kind of assumption, at best, I call it selfish. And then the third assumption is the really problematic assumption. That is, engaging China will bring China into a position that we can deal with rationally. Will make China become one of the responsible members in the global community. This assumption, at best, well, it's a downright stupid. There is no other word that I can find to describe it. But the world have been operating based on these three assumptions, and all of them were wrong. None of these assumptions came true. And then the world nurtured a high-tech totalitarian regime that become the thread of the very civilization we have accomplished many hundreds of years. And then I hope with the sacrifice of Uyghur people, millions of them in the internment camp, I hope the brave fight of the Hong Kongers on the street, I hope many, many years of what we, the Chinese dissidents, in telling the world this, we want our freedom just like the freedom that you're enjoying. The rights defender, like I see that Chen Guangcheng is among us today, and we hope that his story can inspire the world to realize that what we want is the same. Stop that illusion. Stop that based operating based on a false assumption. So 33 years later, we're here, joining this commemoration. It's a painful day, of course. It's a dark day, but I would also want to point out that from that day on, an exhibition, a alliance of exhibition has been formed. When I first came in and I said friends, we are among friends. I'm among with a lot of great friends. I will first want to congratulate Wang Dan for putting together this show. 30-some years of long friend, Xu Guo, Feng Suo, Peng Qing, Jing Yan. All his friends. I mean, we are commemorating the loss, but we are also celebrating the forming of a fellowship. Continue for us to fight for the dream that started 33 years ago. And I'm glad this fellowship is growing. Ambassador Robert Piero, I'm so happy that we have you, Christina, and all the friends in this room join this fellowship. This fellowship is glamorous. We're fighting for the dreams of those who have fallen 33 years ago. In a very simple concept, very simple word, it's freedom. Thank you.
I think as we all can see from that day to today, we are still here. I see the Peng Qing, Feng Suo, and others, all the generations, we are still here. We will never forget, we will never give up. Finally, I want to say, based on the exhibit, our next mission is to build the Zhongfou's Master Memorial Museum in New York, so that we can hold on to our historical memory and not forget those who paid their lives for pursuit of democracy. This is not only an act of resistance against the totalitarianism, but also a demonstration of our responsibility to history. On behalf of the Preparation Committee, I would like to call to all of you here, all friends who wish to hold on to this historical memory should participate in this historical project. Those who with money can contribute money. Those who with time and energy can contribute time and energy. From each according to their ability. Let's all work together to realize this project. I hope that soon we can meet again at the opening ceremony of the Zhongfou's Master Memorial Museum. So thanks again for all of you to attend this opening ceremony. And the reception will start soon. We have some food and drink out there, and you can visit it or stay around from there. And I want to remind you the museum will close at 5 p.m. Thank you very much.